Hello, everybody. This is Michael Faulkner with Touchpoint. We're just letting some people file in. We're going to get started in about 30 or 45 seconds. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to this month's What's the Point webinar, where we explore the ministerial reasons behind many of the things that we do at church each week, month, and year. This month, we specifically are going to be asking the question, what is the point of branding? My name is Michael Faulkner, and joining me is our lead consultant and all-around amazing guy, Andrew Triplett.
Hey everybody, that was quite an intro, Michael. I appreciate that. Quick housekeeping as we're jumping in here. Most of you by this point know how Zoom works, but just in case you don't, as we're working our way through today's presentation, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A field there at the bottom of your screen, in the controls at the bottom of the screen. We'll either address it then, or we'll definitely have time at the end of our presentation today to come back and address those. So quick agenda before kicking things off. We're going to start by talking about the importance of branding. Why is it important to your church? And then how to build and recognizable branding. And then finally, telling your story. And then, like we said, we'll have time for Q&A. So I'm going to hand it back to Michael, and he's going to kick us off.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Wonderful. So yeah, the first question is, why do we even need to focus on branding? I mean, we're churches. You don't normally think of the two going hand in hand as far as being important, but it's incredibly important. And we'll start off just kind of driving home the importance of branding here on the left side of the screen. You see brands that everybody recognizes, right? Domino's, Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, American Airlines. Who doesn't know the Apple icon? And the Apple icon. There we go. That's a little bit better. So, and then Marriott. And by the way, you might have laughed at that Apple icon. That was actually the original logo for Apple when it got its start. So a little bit of an interesting little factoid there. In fact, a few more interesting factoids here on this page. So Starbucks back in 2011 had just recovered from making a terrible branding mistake. They abandoned the traditional siren and went with a kind of a hipster type look and feel that got a horrible reception. And they actually came back with a very bold move of bringing back the traditional green siren, but leaving Starbucks coffee completely off the name. Nobody at that stage was really doing that kind of branding, and you can see how much their brand has continued to take off since then. Similarly, in 2012, Domino's did something like that. Historically, they had been Domino's Pizza, but they wanted people to think of more than just pizza with Domino's. So, they obviously do hot wings and sandwiches, and so they actually dropped the pizza from their name. But my guess is here in the audience, there probably aren't very many people who look at the name Domino's and pizza doesn't still come to mind. So branding is very, very powerful. But over on the right, we see some images that also evoke thoughts in our mind. So the Christian cross is recognized by millions of people, billions of people around the world. The dove represents peace. What a lot of people call the Jesus fish, which actually the technical term is ichthus, which the letters spell out Jesus, Christ, God, Son, Savior. So for those of you who are not aware of that, nor the history, which is this symbol was used among early Christians who were under Roman rule when it was illegal to be a Christian. And so they would use this kind of as a secret code to communicate. And the legend goes that if Andrew and I had just met in the street, I would, with my foot, carve an arc into the dust. And if Andrew was a Christian, he would know to complete that arc making the ichthus fish. Now he and I would know we're Christians, and we'd have that freedom to communicate. So a lot of power behind that specific imagery. You see it probably on the back of a lot of cars. You'll never see it on mine because I am not proud of the way I drive. So until I feel like I represent Christ well with the way I drive, I'll be leaving that off my car. But, again, the question, why would we want to brand in a church? Well, it is, as you can see here, it's going to create and cultivate an instant visual recognition as it relates to your church. It's one of the easiest ways also to differentiate your church. And a lot of people might ask, well, why would I want to differentiate my church from others? I mean, isn't it just fine as long as people are going to a church and hearing the gospel message? Yes, on the second part, but the first part, yes, there's a very compelling reason that you would want to differentiate your church. And I'll come back to that in a couple of slides. So let's consider Google for a moment, just kind of as one final brand, because if you're a Google Gmail user, you recognize the icon by the M, right? That you see right here. And we recognize that these colors are associated with Google. In fact, we recognize the shape of this M by its typography. But this M is not the same M that you see with McDonald's. In fact, the moment I said McDonald's, my guess is everyone's imagining those slender, tall, golden arches. It's incredible the kind of power it has, right? Similarly, your branding design can have a big impact and affect the way that people perceive you. And it can be communicated through language, shape, color, imagery, typography, and icons. So these are the building blocks to creating a very complex visual design structure, and each one plays a big role in determining the overall brand identity. So again, why is it important for churches? Well, every interaction that people have with your church communicates something. It influences perceptions of not only your church, but of Christianity as a whole. Additionally, it distinguishes your church from others. So a very compelling reason, which I alluded to earlier, for church branding was just brought to my attention actually a few weeks ago when a church shared with me that it's very common for their online gifts to end up in the church coffers of another church that's located 2 states away from them because they have the same church name. Now, if you have a strong, powerful brand, people are going to recognize it when they're giving their tithes and offerings. If it needs improvement, they might not, and they might end up donating to another church. That's a fairly compelling reason for making that kind of a change. All right, so next we're going to talk about how would you build a recognizable brand? Well, a lot of churches actually use brand kits. In fact, a lot of secular companies use branding kits. And the reason that you would want to have a guide or a branding kit, if you will, is to communicate with excellence, that it's important to have a standard for your brand and have it documented and have resources to guide people in those standards. So a brand kit guide is really a set of standards and best practices to guide anyone who's communicating on behalf of your church to do so clearly and consistently and with a view of your mission and vision in mind. So here in a little bit, I'm going to actually show an example of a branding kit as well, just to kind of drive that point a little bit more. But here's some things that you can see in a branding kit, a typical branding kit, if you will. So you're going to see, and actually we need to move on. I just realized we're not advancing the slides. So I'm on slide 11, by the way. I'm sorry. Fortunately, there wasn't a whole lot to see there, so you didn't really miss out. There we go. So in a branding kit, we have color schemes, you have logos, you have fonts, and we talked a little bit about how the font for Google is so important, the way that they do their typeface. It's very important. Moving on to the next slide, and addressing specifically the colors, a lot of churches will just use 1 or 2 colors, but you can really add some stickiness, if you will, to your branding by adding accent colors. But again, as you notice here, we have numbered color palettes, and by being very specific in those color palettes, you have the ability to keep that consistency while adding that punch, if you will, to your branding. On the next slide, we show some examples of logos, and good branding should really make it clear what you do. So for example, here on these logos, you see with Bellevue that they use the 3 crosses of Calvary. Next to it, Westover uses the symbol of the Trinity. These are recognizable logos or images, if you will, symbols that tell us what your church is about. And then a lot of the others simply have the name church in their logo. These are important things. Again, you want it to be recognizable, and you want it to prompt action when possible. So if you don't think that a brand can prompt action, here's a quick exercise we're going to do just to make that point. So I want everybody who's listening right now to take a moment and just think about brands that you've come across in your life that are known for using subliminal advertising to get you to buy or consume their product as soon as possible. So we're not talking long term, like something that would make you want to act now. So take about 15 seconds and type into the chat what brand comes to mind. And Katie, I didn't tell you this, but I'm going to ask you to indicate which brand showed up the most. So take about 15 seconds to do that real quick, please. Katie, if you don't mind coming off mute, even though I didn't tell you I was going to do this to you, would you mind sharing which brands came up most?
Yeah, so it looks like we've got a lot for Coca-Cola. We have one for FedEx, but Coca-Cola is the winner.
Oh, fantastic. That's really funny because that's exactly where I thought that might go. Coca-Cola is brilliant when it comes to using their brand. In fact, if you didn't put Coca-Cola on top of your list, my guess is right now you're probably forehead slapping yourself, right? Or even better yet, there are probably several of you that have a Coca-Cola sitting right on your desk next to the computer. And my guess is you just took a sip or you're thinking about taking a sip right now. I mean, it's incredible the power that this brand has to evoke this desire to drink a soda, right? So what I want to really draw your attention to is the way that they use their color scheme, the way that they use their typography. I mean, how many times have you seen people borrow from this to kind of create a meme or a t-shirt or a poster that has a totally different message, but based on the typography and the color scheme, they actually borrowed from the Coca-Cola brand. So again, really important to understand the kind of power typography can have. In fact, or typefaces, can have, because they distinguish, or not distinguish, but they evoke different personalities. Let me just say it that way. I hope I'm saying it correctly, but just like as an example. So Helvetica is one of the fonts that we're familiar with. And it's quite common on US tax forms, right? And it's found in a million other business applications, but it just has a real strong sans serif design feel that makes it official and important. Courier is another example that's a go-to for screenplays because it harkens back to the days of typewriters. But you see, these are evoking emotions, right? Each one conveys a certain feeling, which is why it's important to choose the right one for your church's brand identity. But remember that your brand perception's just about communicating. Sorry about that. I just finished lunch way too recently, but it's not about communicating just personality. It's also about creating a brand experience. So certain design elements can improve or hurt that experience, creating frustration and negative feelings about your brand. So it's very important to be intentional about that design, if you will. So moving on to the next slide, you can pull it all together within this branding kit that we talked about, that creates and maintains again, your color palette or your logo or the font that you're trying to use. So I'm actually going to pull up, and actually, Katie, I guess you'll have to do this. I'd like to pull up an example of a brand guide that one of our church partners uses. This is Abundant Life. And it's just, we're not even going to go through it in great detail, but just want to kind of show you a summary of what a brand kit could look like. Katie, do I need to show my screen instead? I again put you on the spot here. There we go. So this is the Abundant Life brand style guide, and it's found on their website. So if I wanted to go out and represent Abundant Life in the community, I could use this to find out what kind of font, how we're going to define times, how we're going to talk about East Coast versus West Coast, PM, AM, PM. You have different size requirements, if you will, as it relates to Abundant Life, but they're real clear about saying, hey, these aren't rules. These are just kind of guidelines we're giving you in order to effectively and consistently represent Abundant Life. So thanks, Katie, for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if I can add one thing to this, I actually had the awesome opportunity to go on site at this church, and we kind of talked about this brand kit, and this is really for their communications team. This is I hesitate to use the word Bible because the Bible is their Bible. It's a wonderful church, and but in terms of how they communicate to their community, to people all over the world, they are very specific, and even like Michael said, down to AM, PM. How's that going to be written? So it really gives this cohesive experience. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone's speaking with the same voice because they have this in place, and it answers a lot of questions. So no one really has to go back to the team and say, hey, you know, do I finish my email with the word sincerely? Go check the brand guide, because the brand guide addresses it, and it also addresses what not to do. I don't know if you saw it a moment ago, but it also talks about what not to do in terms of the logo itself. Never turn it sideways. You know, don't do it diagonally. So that keeps them, even though that seems nitpicky, it keeps them all on the same page, all doing the same thing, and it's really, really well done.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I appreciate it. All right. So really the last slide there are two more slides I was going to show. One is, this is kind of outside the three things we talked about with the color scheme and the logo and the type font, but sometimes it's good also just to have some stock images around. And these stock images, again, are designed to represent your church, but kind of have a consistent look and feel, and allow you to, if you have them kind of in a reservoir or a bank, you can quickly and easily access them for worship guides, for, you know, anything that's, you know, an outside view, if you will, but, you know, upcoming events that you're going to have, children's area events. It's just easy to quickly grab those and be sure that those who are responsible for putting this content together are all drawing from the same types of images. All right, so how do we pull it all together? Well, again, we talked about the Abundant Life style guide, and the fact that it's presented or provided on their website, so you could quickly, easily access it. But I wanted to just kind of show a church that does it very well, Vestavia Hills. What I want you to notice about this is the consistency throughout, not just from the font standpoint, but notice that even their images have had overlays that make sure that the colors that are being brought out represent or reflect the colors that are up in the top banner as well. So in other words, you know, my wife would say, Michael, they match. There's the easiest way to describe it. It matches very well. And it's just got a very appealing look and feel to it. So again, branding for your church can be very important for so many reasons. I mean, if I'm telling someone, hey, I attend this church down the street and it is fantastic, it's godly preaching directly from the Bible, and they ask me the name, then we want to be sure that that name doesn't get confused with others. We want to be sure that that name has a strong brand so that you're able to, in fact, capture those folks in a way that puts them in front of you and lets you give them the gospel, excuse me, the gospel message. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my friend over here that I've forgotten the name of, Andrew, who I've only worked with for a year. Sorry about that. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pivot a little bit, because some people in the audience are actual Touchpoint users. Others might be using a church management platform from another provider. And what we're going to talk about next is just how important it can be to brand inside that church management environment to evoke positive feelings from your staff members and lay leaders as they are using it, and to ensure that those who are giving on the right page versus perhaps a church that's 2 states away.
All right, thanks, Michael. So Touchpoint, if we jump to the next slide here, Touchpoint, we really view this as an extension of your church. It is a part of who you are as a church. You know, a lot of you that are listening in today probably think or might think of Touchpoint as your database, as your church database, and it's not inaccurate to consider us your church database. However, what we really want you to start thinking about Touchpoint as is actually the most important communications tool at your disposal, the most important communications tool that your team has. Now, your team might be using maybe a few third parties, something like MailChimp. We do have the MailChimp integration and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we desire for your congregation to be interfacing and connecting with Touchpoint in a lot of different places. I'm going to walk through a few of those in just a minute. So it's really important to start building a familiarity to staff and end users. We'll talk about that. Instilling trust in the database itself. There's no better way to instill trust in the database and in the CHMS than to brand it with your church, because your congregant members, they trust you, they trust your church. And so if you take that branding and apply it to your database, then that trust transfers over. And then ultimately it creates a more positive experience. Michael gave that example a moment ago of individuals, and we hear about this happening quite often. Someone will go to a church called First Baptist Church, and they try to give, not realizing that they're giving to First Baptist Church 3 states over. It does happen. And so having strong branding, strong communication skills really benefits. All right, so let's take a look on the next slide here. The very first page, theoretically, that a member of your staff or congregation would interact with within Touchpoint, and that is the login page. All right, so we try to make it as easy as possible to update and brand this login page. Having a beautiful background image goes a long way to do this. If you don't have a background image, you can just use the branding from the website, whatever is happening on your website, and just try to make that a cohesive experience. This happens to be our friends over at Calvary Baptist in New York City. And so stands to reason they're going to have a backdrop displaying New York. That's where they are. That's part of their identity. And then, of course, they've included their logo. Their logo is a word mark in this case, so very identifiable. They know very quickly that this is Calvary Baptist Church. All right, the next example here, if you don't happen to live in New York City in a high rise and can get that image, like most of us cannot, then using something that is distinguishable for your church. This is one of our other church partners, Bellevue Baptist Church. And if you've ever been to Memphis, and hopefully all of you are coming to our summit this September, quick plug there for our summit, but we really, really want to see you in Memphis. And if you get to come to Memphis and join us at Bellevue, who's hosting it, you will see immediately these 3 crosses. You can't miss them. They're on the main highway, right down I-40 here in Memphis. And everyone knows, if you say go to Bellevue, they might say which one, and then you say the 3 crosses. Boom, they know who you are. So having an identifiable iconography on there, and then of course they're displaying their logo. They've actually chosen to continue using the word Touchpoint on that branding screen, but I don't know if you noticed on the Calvary Baptist, they've removed that, and that's okay. You're not going to hurt our feelings, and in fact, we are perfectly okay if you want to remove Touchpoint entirely and just make it your own. Make it your own, because this is like I said, it's your communications tool to your congregation. And so, most of your members, they don't know what Touchpoint is unless you define it for them. But if you were to explain to them, hey, this is the First Baptist Church hub or portal, something like that, they would know what that is. They know that that's for me. That's where I go and interface with my church. All right. So on the next screen, kind of continuing with that. If you log into Touchpoint right now, if you haven't updated this, you're going to see in the top left-hand corner of your database of Touchpoint is the Touchpoint logo. You do have the ability to modify that. And I'm going to show you here in a moment. We have help articles that are included in this slide deck. We're going to send you the slide deck. So you have it, you can access these help articles and make these changes. But there's actually 2 logos that you can change within the database to, again, make it your own. The first is the one that you're seeing on the screen. You see there, I know it's kind of small, but up in the top left-hand corner, the 10th Pres logo. So again, just kind of continues that cohesive experience from the login page into the database. You still see 10th Pres. And then what I'm not showing here is actually if you were to access this same page or access the database from your mobile device, there's a separate logo that's just the mark, and you can update both of those. So that whether they're logging in from a PC, logging in from their mobile device on their phone, all of that is going to display your logo again to kind of remove Touchpoint. If you want to remove Touchpoint and kind of put yourself in that place. All right. So the next place that is going to be extremely common for your members and for the world at large to interact with your church is on the giving page. All right. So having a beautiful shell in place that communicates who the church is, continues that branding onto the giving page is going to be extremely important. The example that Michael used, again, just someone who accidentally gave to the wrong church. My guess is that they weren't using strong branding tools to brand that page, and it just looked like a generic giving page, and the person got a little bit confused and gave again to the wrong church. So having good branding, the one that I'm showing on the screen here, it's pretty simple. You'll notice there's not a lot to it. It has a header with branding that reflects back to the church, to maybe their disaster relief campaign that they have exposed their members to, so that when they get to this page, they recognize it. The next one, very, very similar. This is from our church partner down in Dallas, Highland Park UMC. Really great church that does a great job with their branding. You can see just how clean it is. They have their mission statement over on the left, and then on the right is your opportunity to give. All right, and then finally the last one, I just wanted to show the online registration. So this is actually kind of the next component. This is the next way that someone is likely to interact with your church. So obviously you have the login shells, you have the online giving shells, and then you have the online registration process as well. So when someone comes to register their kids for camp, or register for the women's retreat that's coming up, that sort of thing, it's pulling in that branding. So taking the time to brand each one of those. And even if you wanted to, if you kind of wanted to go that extra mile, you can brand each individual event or each individual ministry, something like that. So I know at the church that I attend, the youth department has a branding that sort of reflects back to the church. It still has some of those same elements, but it's been updated or slightly tweaked to reflect the youth group itself. And so taking the time to update, brand those online registration pages. Again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, and we give you the tools. We have help articles. You can reach out to our team to help with this if you're not comfortable working within design elements. But this page, as you can see, it's a logo. It's branded colors that are being pulled over from the website, and a footer. And that's about it. That's really all it takes to give someone the confidence that they are registering in the right place, they're giving in the right place, and so on. All right, next, another place that someone might interact with your church is the check-in process. I know a lot of churches are reopening right now, or have been reopening for the last few months, and so you're coming back into Touchpoint to set up registrations, or excuse me, set up check-in. Some of you might not even know that we have actually updated our check-in process. We now have a web check-in process that uses a browser. If you haven't seen that, again, we have help articles that can kind of help guide you to that and help you get that set up. But I think you'll have a really nice experience with it. One of the benefits of the web check-in browser is this concept of profiles that we've set up. Now, you can have as many profiles as you want, and you can assign images to those different profiles. So this opens up a whole world of possibilities from a branding perspective. And again, kind of going back to the theme of our webinars here these last few weeks, what's the point? What's the point of branding each one of these? It's to give the individual a cohesive experience, build trust for that individual, and really kind of reflects ministry excellence as well. Taking the time to have a check-in screen that looks great and reflects the church, the church's branding. We have, I think a lot of churches are doing VBS this summer. So if you have branding for VBS, take the time to brand the check-in process for VBS, because that's gonna be a really cool experience when maybe the theme this year is Noah, and they come to check in and there's an ark with animals and that sort of thing. So kind of a whimsical, it kind of sets the stage for what they'll be doing that day as they're checking in right from the beginning. All right, next, emails. All right, like I said at the top, Touchpoint is really, we really want you to see Touchpoint as your primary communications tool. I mean, there's so much you can do within Touchpoint from a communications perspective, whether it be email, text message, reply words for text messages, registrations. We'll talk about the mobile app here in just a second, but email is sort of where that begins. And so having and this is where that branding guide that we spoke about earlier really comes in handy. Having, it doesn't have to be as in depth as at Abundant Life one. Those guys just did a phenomenal job. They knocked it out of the park putting together that branding guide. But even just some kind of a one-sheeter that gives people an idea of, hey, here's the logo we want you to use, here's the colors that we want you to use, here's how we open every email with hey Sarah, or hey first name, just so there's no confusion, and again, so that we're all speaking with one voice. There are 2 email builders within Touchpoint. Some of you are already aware of this. The one that we really push, the one that we really prefer, is the mobile responsive email builder, because of just what the name implies. It builds beautiful mobile responsive emails. Most people, we've talked about this in the past, most people are viewing their emails on a mobile device. So having a mobile template or having a template that looks great in the mobile environment is really important. But we hopefully give you the tools to make that easy. All right, the next one here, small group finder. Not everyone on the call is using this. Some of you, this might be the first time that you're hearing about it, but we do have a small group finder built into the system where you can set up all your different small groups where people can go find them. They can use filters to say, all right, I'm looking for a group for married couples that meets on the weekends at 5 p.m., something like that. You can really get granular, and then the system will pull a list of all of the classes that meet that criteria. What you're seeing on the screen there with the map at the center of the screen, that's part of a Google API that is optional. You don't have to use that, but we can help get that in place for you. And then, of course, taking the time again to brand this page so it's one cohesive experience. All right, next. This is another way to create a brand, to build a brand. And like I've said a few times now, it is okay if your members of your church, maybe they don't know what Touchpoint is, and that's okay. You can make it your own. You can switch that up so that it is your hub, your church's hub. Here's a few examples. One of the things you can use to do that is a custom domain. So we have several churches who are using a custom domain. This is just a couple examples. my.bellevue.org. So again, rather than using bellevue.tpsdb.com, that goes away, and now everyone in that congregation can access Touchpoint using my.bellevue.org. Much more recognizable. The user knows what that is. They don't know what TPSDB is. What are all these random letters put together? You and I know what that is, but your members might not. So using a custom domain to clearly communicate where they can go to see their record, to see their giving, to access a giving statement, access their Sunday school classes and the rosters and that sort of thing. This makes a big difference. A couple others: myaccount.inglewood.church, portal.whcchome.org. So that particular church, they call it the portal. They call it the West Houston Chinese Church portal. Go here and you can access the portal to find all the information you're looking for. mysaintann.org, blevener.com. That's a really cool one because it becomes literally, the database becomes a verb, blevener.com. So really unique options there. All right, then next, as promised, let's talk about the mobile app. And this is a huge branding opportunity, right? It needs to reflect your brand. It needs to reflect the church at large. So the custom branded mobile app, we have a lot of churches that are just doing a really great job with this. We have examples that we can show. But maybe the most important thing here to understand is that it needs to reflect back to the website. One of the ways that we sort of tell our churches to think about the mobile app is that your website, every church has a website. It's very rare that I come across a church that doesn't have a website this day and age. But your website is sort of your billboard to the world. So anyone that's interested in your church, that wants to get to know who you are, maybe learn more about the pastor, learn more about the staff, get directions to the church, they're going to go to your website to do that. So like I said, it's the billboard to the world. The app acts more like that hub, that place that someone can go once they've sort of bought in. You know, you're not going to have many guests that show up on a Sunday morning that have the app. Maybe you have a few, but by and large, the majority of the people that have your app, your church's app, are people who have bought in, who have said, yes, I'm a part of this church. I want to, not only do I want to know more, but I want to take part in the mission of this church. And so you should really tailor your app accordingly. So any functionality that exists within it needs to have that in mind. You know, people are coming here to give, to register for an event, to access sermon notes, so on and so forth, because they have, like I said, they've already bought in. And on the next slide here, you're going to see what it looks like, what we mean when we say, hey, your app should kind of harken back or reflect the website. So using that cohesive experience between the two just gives people the confidence that they're in the right place, they've downloaded the right app for the right First Baptist Church, because there are a lot of churches these days that have very similar names. But this particular church in Knoxville, Tennessee, great church, Cokesbury, you can see that the branding within the app, or the look and feel in the app, reflects the look and feel of the website itself, and just really creates a nice cohesive experience there. All right. So last slide here, just some resources. Like I said earlier, we're going to provide this slide deck to you so that you can have access to this Touchpoint University. We always have training available. Several of our trainings are free. They're free 30-minute sessions. So we'd encourage you to take a look at what's available, what's being offered, and you can set that up with our team. We have some help articles. So a couple here that we're going to share with you. You can always go to docs.touchpointsoftware.com to access those. But here's some help articles for default shell, custom login page, custom header, the web check-in design. Like I said, we have new check-in. So if you're in the process of reopening your church right now, you'll definitely want to take a look at that to set up check-in, and then the small group finder. Some external resources that we think would be a really, really big benefit to you if you're not familiar with these already. Unsplash.com, free usable images, beautiful looking images that are 100% free that you can use. It really elevates your branding to have professional looking images associated with it. So I'd encourage you to kind of go. You can kind of get lost on unsplash.com to be honest with you, and just looking at all these beautiful images. You type in a keyword, you can find whatever you're looking for. Color picker, a good way to keep your colors consistent throughout all of your different emails and mobile app and so on and so forth. Having a color picker, there's some good extensions. So we provide a link for that. Coolors.com, another website that you can kind of get lost on. I'd encourage you to go take a look at coolors.com, COOLORS. And I guess they changed it to .co. So coolors.co. Go take a look, and you can build these beautiful color palettes. Using this, they have a really nice free tool to generate some cool color schemes. Bootstrap docs. You know, if you do need to work use CSS within Touchpoint, there's some documents that can help with that. And then if you really want to dive in and learn more about how to code, how to manipulate HTML, CSS, I don't think there's any better source than Code Academy. So take a look at Code Academy for that. All right, so that is all for me. So we have just a couple minutes remaining here at the end to look at some questions.
I'm actually going to throw out the coolors.co is not an active link. I think we might have mistyped that in. I'm not sure what the correct one is, but we'll get that out to you if we can't answer that question during this time frame. Yeah, to Andrew's point, if you have any questions, this would be a great time to go ahead and answer them. So Andrew, Laura asked, which of the Touchpoint help articles covers changing the domain? So customizing the domain.
Okay, that is actually something that we need to do. That is an additional service. I meant to mention that before. I apologize, but that is an additional service that we provide. I believe that's $300. It's a one-time payment, $350, and we can do that for you. We just need you to, and we'll work with you to get that done. We just need you to provide that domain to us. So you'll actually have to go purchase that domain. Usually that portion of the process is pretty cheap. But if you'll provide that to us, we can help you with, from there.
And then thank you to, well, I've already missed who originally wrote it, but Dania also wrote in, it's Coolors, so COOLORS.co. COOLORS.co. All right. So moving through, is there a way, let's see, is there a way to set your emails in Touchpoint to have them all automatically be the same font?
Say that one more time.
Is there a way to set the emails in Touchpoint so that they all have the same font?
Okay, so the email builder or the editor itself, it has a preset. It has a preset fonts in it. Something that's interesting about email to keep in mind as you're building out emails is that email providers like Gmail, Outlook, Yahoo, AOL, so on and so forth, it's kind of the wild, wild west. Unfortunately, there's very little standardization for email providers. And so when building an email, you really want to keep your fonts pretty simple. So you'll notice in Touchpoint, when building an email, the editor itself only provides about, I think, 6 or 7 options for a font. And that's on purpose. That's entirely intentional because we know that all email providers are going to recognize those fonts. If you try to use some kind of crazy fonts that you've downloaded online from the web, it's very unlikely that an email provider, or at least all email providers, will be able to read those. So for the sake of keeping everyone on the same page, we provide about 6 or 7 within the builder that you can choose from.
Great. Jessica had a follow-up to her question, which was, can you request that Touchpoint upload a certain font if it's not already there?
Likely not, primarily for the reasons that I laid out. Simply, there's just no guarantee. There's no way to guarantee that those fonts would be readable by, say, Gmail. So Gmail, you never really know how it's going to respond. It'll likely default to some font that you didn't intend, like Times New Roman or Arial, or worst case scenario, it just won't show at all. I don't think that's less likely these days, but it's a little bit unpredictable.
All right. And then we have another question just about the email builder and the future of the email builder as it relates to the mobile app. What kind of plans do we have on our roadmap for that?
For the email builder itself, not a lot. We're always trying to make the email process a little bit better. I have received a few requests recently for some new replacement codes. So hopefully we'll see those on the roadmap. But for the builder itself, I don't anticipate many changes for 2021.
All right, thank you for that. Well, folks, I know we're already 3 minutes past the time that we suggested. If there are any questions that we did not get to, then we will circle back. We'll come in, grab them, and we'll follow up with you. We have your registrations, we have your email address, and we'll be sure to answer those questions. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for your time this month. Again, we're going to be doing a session like this once every month. There'll always be a new topic, and it's always going to be asking, what's the point? So tune in next month again, and we'll dive into a new What's the Point webinar. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.